In a small southern town, where justice often leaned on the wrong side, lived Malik, a 10-year-old black boy. His innocent look, often hidden behind a shy smile, hid a much harsher reality. Raised alone by his mother Aisha, a woman of incredible strength, Malik knew poverty like one knows an old book whose pages are worn, but he did not suffer from it. He knew that every drop of sweat his mother shed carried the promise of a better future. Aisha, a cleaning lady in the homes of the richest, worked long hours every day, but she never complained. She was the epitome of dignity, and everything she did for Malik, to give him a chance to rise beyond the invisible chains that seemed to hold the city together. Malik, although growing up fragile under poverty, was not simply a street child. He was a dreamer, an intelligent boy with a mind hungry for knowledge. Books were his treasures, and those that spoke of justice, heroism, and freedom were his most faithful companions. He often got lost in the pages of stories where heroes triumphed against injustice, where an individual's soul could challenge corrupt systems and change the world. But those dreams sometimes clashed with the reality of his town, a place where a white man's privilege was worth more than a black child's truth. One afternoon, while playing with other children near the market, a broken cry broke the air.
A rich woman, Madame Lefebvre, stood in the middle of the street, her eyes wide with fear and anger.
The gold bracelet that decorated her wrist was missing. The crowd, although little interested in the misfortunes of others, froze, intrigued by this cry of distress.
My gold bracelet.
It's missing, she cried, panic twisting her features. His gaze searched feverishly among the children, then fixed on Malik, who was playing not far away. In a split second, without any thought, she pointed at the boy, accusing him of theft. It's that boy. He was right next to me. He must have stolen him, she called, her voice full of icy certainty. Malik, who had done nothing, froze in place. He had seen Madame Lefebvre's stern look on him, as if she knew he was guilty, as if his skin color was sufficient proof. The child, lost, opened his eyes wide. I didn't do anything, ma'am. I didn't take anything, he stammered, instinctively taking a step back, his hands trembling slightly. He knew that in this town, his word had no weight compared to that of a white woman. The passers-by, who until then had continued their activities without paying attention, had now all turned towards him. Malik, small and frail, suddenly felt alone, trapped in a net he had not weaved. No words of defense would have been enough. The arrival of a police officer was as rapid as it was unfair. He asked no questions, paid no attention to the look of terror on Malik's face. With a sharp gesture, he grabbed the boy by the arm and took him to the police station. But he didn't do anything, shouted Aisha, running, having been warned by neighbors. She arrived just in time to see her son taken away. Her eyes, drowned in tears, searched for a compassionate look, but she found only indifferent faces. She rushed to the officer, begging desperately. He didn't do anything, please. He's an honest child. The policeman shrugged his shoulders, without even looking her in the eyes. Madam, we will investigate. But in the meantime, your son must stay here. Aisha, devastated, felt helpless. She had no money, no influence, and the law was never on her side. Her son, her little Malik, was going to spend the night in a place that no child should know. In the cell, Malik felt even smaller than he did in the street. The room was cold, stuffy, filled with menacing noises, hoarse voices, inarticulate screams, rattling chains. Everything around him seemed unreal, a dull threat around every corner. He sat in the corner, clutching his knees drawn up to his chest, trying to control his tears. At 10 years old, he didn't have the words to understand everything he was experiencing. Why him? Why did a simple child end up behind bars, like a criminal? His thoughts flew to his mother, who also constantly fought for him to have a better life. The tenderness of his arms, his unconditional love, it all seemed so far away here. The pain of this separation was stronger than the fear that grew within him. He gritted his teeth, repeating to himself like a mantra the words of a hero he had read in one of his books. Justice will come, it must come. But Malik did not yet know how much this justice would cost him. The next day, Malik was taken to court, a place that seemed as cold and imposing as the cell where he had spent the night. He wore the same clothes as the day before, dirty and wrinkled, the traces of the injustice that weighed on him visible in every corner of his being. His hair, disheveled, seemed to reflect his tumultuous thoughts.
His tired eyes betrayed a sleepless night, haunted by fear, doubt and the cold of the cell.
He had lost track of time, everything seemed blurry, unreal, like a bad dream from which he could not escape. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. The judge, a man of around 50, with strict glasses and a piercing gaze, opened the session with an authoritative voice. He seemed neither interested nor concerned about a child's life. His words were like a sentence, an unbearable weight. Malik Daira, 10 years old, accused of robbery. What are you pleading? The young boy stood frozen, his heart racing. He felt invisible, as if everything around him was an illusion. What did all these complicated terms he heard mean? Robbery, accused, plead, words too big for his little shoulders. Malik swallowed, his throat dry, his hands trembling, and responded in a shy, almost inaudible voice. I didn't steal anything, Judge. His words died away in the frozen silence of the room, where every look seemed to judge him before he even had the chance to defend himself. Madame Lefebvre, standing on the other side, did not wait to speak. She was already ready to deliver her verdict. His tone was sharp, full of certainty. A boy like him, hanging around outside all day, unsupervised. It's these children who steal, it's well known. His words, far crueler than she would have liked to imagine, rang through the room like a judgment bell. She wasn't just talking about Malik, but about an entire category of children, those who had no name, no value, those who were looked at with suspicion just because of their skin color or their status. Her gaze slid over him, judging him before she even knew him. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a heavy weight, a vice of prejudice gripping the room. The gazes of the others, often discreet, turned towards Malik. He could almost feel their contempt, their indifference. This accusation was not just an isolated act, it was a reflection of a larger system, which saw him primarily as a culprit, a wannabe thief, rather than an innocent child. The court-appointed attorney, a man who seemed as tired and disinterested as the rest of the room, reluctantly stood up. He tried to offer a meager defense, but his words were hollow, almost devoid of conviction. His shifty gaze spoke volumes about his lack of commitment. Mr. Judge, we have no proof that this boy stole this bracelet. But the prosecutor, implacable, came forward with his own weight of accusations. He knew that in this system, truth was not the only criterion that mattered. Your Honor, the bracelet disappeared when this child was next to the victim. Isn't that proof enough? Furthermore, he comes from a disadvantaged background. His motive is obvious. The prosecutor spoke of Malik as an object, a representation of a stereotype that he seemed to reinforce. The absence of proof did not matter. Malik's poverty was his condemnation, his motive, as if he never had any choice but to steal to survive. The color of his skin, his social status, were all obvious clues in this reasoning, a reasoning where the presumption of guilt seemed stronger than the presumption of innocence. Aisha, sitting on a bench in the room, listened to each word like a slap. The tears she held back were bitterer than the fear she felt for her son. How could Malik be treated like this, a child who had done nothing wrong? How could these adults, supposed to embody justice, view her son, with a pure heart and innocent soul, as a potential criminal? Each accusation that fell on him, each contemptuous look, was an additional wound, a bell that rang his failure to protect his child. The judge, implacable, listened to the arguments without blinking. He was used to these affairs. After all, he was just a poor boy, another child who would eventually be forgotten. But Aisha, in her despair, then stood up, unable to remain silent. She tried to speak, to defend her son, but her voice was lost in the tumult of the room. She could not accept that her Malik, this child she loved with all her heart, was judged on prejudices and stereotypes. The judge turned to her, ordering her to be quiet with a simple gesture of his hand, as if to put her in her place. Aisha sat down again, but in her heart, a flame grew. She knew she had to fight, whatever the cost, for Malik. Because in this room, only the truth mattered. She would not let her son be defended by indifference. The judge looked at Malik, a look heavy with responsibility and hesitation. This boy, so young, so vulnerable, seemed to be the epitome of injustice. He was just a child caught in a whirlwind much bigger than himself. His trembling hands and worried look were those of a terrified little being, facing a system that had little interest in his suffering.
In Malik's eyes, the judge rida desprical for justice, for humanity.
The judge frowned, suddenly feeling trapped in this moment that was beyond him. He sat up straighter in his chair, a slight tremor in his fingers betraying the tension building within him. He searched for an answer, some semblance of reason in the chaos around him, but he found none. The room seemed to shrink around him, the weight of the situation crushing him. Malik, do you have anything to say before I give my verdict? The judge's voice was cold, formal, but his eyes, lost in those of the boy, betrayed a vulnerability that he had never let appear before. The boy looked up at him, tear-filled eyes that shone with bright innocence, as if trying to understand why he was here, why he had to face such accusers. He took a deep breath, and in a shaky breath, his voice resonated in the silence of the room like a sword of truth, cutting through the walls of prejudice. Mr. Judge, would you have convicted your son without proof? The words fell like lightning. The question hung in the air, simple, but devastatingly powerful.
A heavy, almost palpable silence invades the room.
No one dared to move, and the judge, taken by surprise, felt himself waver under the depth of this question. Malik had just asked the one question that none of them had dared to ask. The judge felt his heart tighten, his certainties waver. He was no longer a judge observing a procedure. He was no longer this man whom the weight of power had transformed, insensitive to the suffering of others. He found himself face to face with a child, a little boy who, despite his poverty, despite his skin color, had not committed any crime. A child who, in his purity, had just questioned a system that had imposed guilt on him based on appearances and stereotypes. The judge then saw his own son again, almost the same age, walking happily home from school, his school bag full of dreams and innocence, his future still unblemished. A solitary tear broke from her eye and slowly rolled down her cheek. It was a tear he hadn't shed in years, a memory erased from his buried emotions. Malik's words had shattered this shell of indifference that he had built up over the course of his career. For the first time in a long time, he felt human. The child in front of him was not a case, a defendant, a number among others. He was a human being, a child whose only mistake had been to be born into an unfavorable context. With a slow, trembling movement, he grabbed his hammer. The weight of his decision seemed to crush his hands. But he knew what he had to do, even if it went against everything he had previously believed. He banged the gavel on his desk, his gaze never leaving Malik, as if to offer him one last burst of humanity in this cold and distant room. The case is closed.
Malik is free.
A murmur ran through the room, a shudder of disbelief. Madame Lefebvre turned pale, shocked, unable to accept this change of heart. Malik, for his part, did not have time to understand right away. He burst into tears, a wave of relief rushing through his body. He hadn't stolen the bracelet, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had survived a system that had already judged him guilty without proof. But now he was free. He rushed towards his mother, who had jumped up. Her arms closed around him with such force that the world seemed to dissolve around them. Aisha, embracing him, whispered sweet words to him, words of comfort, of promise of a better future. Malik snuggled against her, still trembling, but feeling a new warmth, that of love and support. He was no longer alone. He no longer had to fight to prove his innocence. This moment, this victory, was theirs. The judge, for his part, remained there, frozen in his chair, after the room emptied. The murmur of footsteps receding, the voices stilling, it all seemed unreal, like an indifferent backdrop. He, the man responsible for dispensing justice, was now alone with his conscience. He thought about everything he had almost done. He saw himself on the verge of condemning an innocent man, a child, simply because he was black and poor. And this thought haunted him, gripped him. That day, something in him changed forever. He made a decision that would resonate in every case he examined in the future. He would never again judge a child without seeing beyond appearances. He would no longer allow skin color, social status, poverty to become factors that determine someone's destiny. He vowed to always look at the humanity behind each accused, and to never forget that every person, every child, deserved to be judged fairly. And long after that day, Malik's words continued to resonate in his heart, tirelessly, like a bell of truth. Would you have condemned your son without proof?